What would you do if your diary started writing answers to your questions? That was the thought that would haunt Claire until the very last night of her life. But when it began, it was nothing more than an impulse purchase, something small and forgettable, at least, that's what she believed. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when Claire ducked into the thrift shop at the corner of Main and Holloway. The shop was cramped and smelled faintly of mildew and mothballs, its narrow aisles lined with mismatched furniture, chipped porcelain dolls, faded clothes, and boxes of yellowing books. Claire came here often, not because she needed anything, but because she liked the way the past seemed to hum quietly from every forgotten object. It was a place where things carried stories, even if no one remembered them anymore. She was running her fingers across a stack of hardcovers when she noticed it, tucked beneath a heap of outdated encyclopedias and torn magazines. A small leather-bound diary, the kind with a little clasp and a keyhole at the edge. Its cover was dark brown, though age had worn it to a shade closer to black, with strange swirling patterns pressed into the leather, almost like vines or veins. The lock itself was delicate, bronze-colored, and rusted, yet still intact. She turned it over in her hands, feeling the surprising weight of it. Unlike the cracked spines and loose pages of the other books, this diary seemed oddly preserved. Careful with that one. Claire glanced up. The voice belonged to the shop's owner, an older woman with wiry gray hair and eyes that darted too quickly, as if they were always checking shadows. She stood near the counter, watching Claire with a stiffness that felt more like warning than concern. "It's just a diary," Claire said with a small laugh, brushing a thumb across the lock. The woman shook her head almost imperceptibly. "Some things don't belong on shelves. That's one of them." Claire felt a prickle of unease at her words, but also a stubborn spark of curiosity. She had always hated being told no, and the way the woman's voice quivered made her want it even more. "How much?" The woman hesitated. For a moment, Claire thought she might refuse to sell it altogether. Then she sighed, muttered something under her breath, and said, $5. "But don't bring it back to me if you regret it." Claire slipped a crumpled bill from her pocket and exchanged it quickly, tucking the diary into her bag before the woman could change her mind. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped back into the rain, clutching her coat tighter around herself. She tried to shake off the shopkeeper's look, that strange flicker of pity, or was it fear, but it stayed with her all the way home. Her apartment was small, just a single bedroom on the top floor of a creaky building that smelled perpetually of dust and stale coffee. Claire tossed her wet jacket on the chair, pulled the diary from her bag, and set it on the desk by the window. The rain pattered against the glass in steady rhythm, the kind of weather that made her want to curl up with something cozy. But her eyes kept drifting back to the diary, sitting there like it was waiting for her. The clasp had no key, but when she tried to pull it open, the lock gave way with a soft click, as if it had been expecting her. Inside, the pages were yellowed but blank. She flipped through them quickly, expecting to find faded scribbles or old entries from a previous owner, but there was nothing, just clean, empty pages stretching from front to back. She found a pen and sat down, the kind of impulse that felt silly even as she did it. She hadn't kept a diary since middle school, when her entries had been filled with crushes, homework, and petty fights with friends. Now, at 19, she had nothing especially dramatic to record. Still, she bent over the page and wrote. September 14th, 9:32 p.m. Today was boring. I wish something exciting would happen tomorrow. She stared at the words, smiled faintly at herself, and then snapped the diary shut. It was dumb, harmless. Just a way to kill a rainy evening. But later that night, when she returned to her desk to set her alarm, she noticed the diary again. The clasp had fallen shut, but it wasn't locked. She hesitated, then flipped it open. Her words were still there, the same looping handwriting. But just beneath them, in a darker, jagged scrawl that was most definitely not hers, another line had appeared. It will. You'll regret asking. Claire froze, her eyes locked on the unfamiliar letters. The ink looked fresh, glistening faintly in the lamplight as if it had just been written. She felt a chill crawl up her spine, but her rational mind tried to catch up, to explain it. Maybe she had written it and forgotten? No, that handwriting was wrong. Uneven. Almost trembling. She dropped the diary onto the desk as if it had burned her, heart thudding against her ribs. The rain outside grew harder, rattling against the glass like impatient fingers. She turned off the lamp, climbed into bed, and pulled the blanket up to her chin. It was just a prank, she told herself. Maybe the diary had belonged to someone before, and she had just missed the writing when she flipped through. That was all. Still, long after she shut her eyes, she could see those words glowing in the dark behind her eyelids. You'll regret asking. Claire woke the next morning to sunlight spilling weakly through her curtains. For a moment she lay still, the events of last night slipping across her mind like a bad dream. The thrift shop, the diary, the strange words that had appeared in someone else's hand, it almost felt silly now. She must have been more tired than she realized, her brain inventing things as her eyes blurred from lack of sleep. That had to be it. But when she sat up and looked across the room, the diary was still sitting on the desk. Its dark cover looked perfectly ordinary in the daylight, as though it had never held any menace at all. Claire chewed on her lip, swinging her legs out of bed. She hesitated before walking over, her fingertips hovering above the cover before she finally flipped it open. The words were still there. Her neat handwriting on the first line, and beneath it, that other one, dark, jagged, final. It will. You'll regret asking. Her stomach tightened. She traced the unfamiliar letters with her eyes again and again, but no explanation came. She wanted to slam it shut and forget it, but curiosity held her like invisible hands. Against her better judgment, she turned to the next blank page, lifted her pen, and wrote with deliberate slowness. Was it you who wrote that? Her pulse quickened as she stared at the page. Seconds passed. A minute. Nothing happened. She almost laughed at herself, shaking her head at how ridiculous this was. But then, just as she began to push the diary away, she saw it, letters forming, slow at first, as if pressed from beneath the page. Her breath caught. Yes. The word was simple, sharp, undeniably real. Her hand trembled as she clutched the edge of the desk, her mind scrambling to explain it away. Maybe it was some kind of trick pen? Invisible ink? But no, this wasn't science. This wasn't something you could wave away with reason. She was staring at an answer that had not existed moments ago. Her throat felt dry. Against all instinct, she wrote again. Who are you? The pause was longer this time. She sat frozen, every nerve in her body alive with terror and fascination. The letters began to snake across the page in the same jagged scrawl as before. Someone who knows you. Someone who sees. Claire snapped the book shut so fast the pages bent. Her hands were clammy. Knows me? Sees? She could hear the shopkeeper's warning echoing in her head, some things don't belong on shelves. She shoved the diary into her desk drawer, slamming it shut, and forced herself to breathe. The rest of the day felt off-kilter. In class, she couldn't focus. Every time her professor spoke, her mind drifted back to the drawer. At lunch, her friends chatted about parties and deadlines, but their voices seemed distant, muffled by the pounding of her thoughts. Someone who knows you. Someone who sees. The words coiled tighter and tighter inside her. By evening, the temptation became unbearable. She told herself she just needed to prove it, to test it in a way that could only be explained if something impossible was happening. Something small. Harmless. Then she could throw it away, burn it, whatever it took. She pulled the diary from the drawer and set it on her lap. Her pen hovered, hesitated, then pressed to the page. What will happen tomorrow at school? Her eyes widened as the response appeared slowly, steadily, as though the hand behind it was savoring each stroke. You will drop your coffee on the stairs. Everyone will see. You'll hate the laughter. Claire's stomach dropped. It was specific, painfully specific. She clenched her jaw and snapped the diary shut, telling herself she wouldn't let it get to her. She wouldn't even bring coffee tomorrow. That would prove it false. The next morning, she held her resolve. No coffee. No test of fate. She walked through the halls clutching her books, determined to disprove the diary's power. But as she rounded the corner, someone bumped into her. Hard. She stumbled forward, and the bottle of iced coffee in the girl's hand spilled across Claire's sweater, dripping down her front. Gasps echoed, followed by the sharp sting of laughter. Her cheeks burned as she darted away, hearing the whispers trail behind her. It wasn't her coffee. It wasn't even her mistake. But the diary had been right. That night, her hands shook as she opened it again. She didn't want to write. She didn't want to give it any more power. But her fear was tangled with something stronger, curiosity. How do you know these things? She wrote, the ink smudging from her unsteady grip. The diary answered almost instantly this time, as though it had been waiting. Because I am writing your story. And I am only on the first page. Claire felt the blood drain from her face. She stared at the words until they blurred, the sound of her heartbeat thundering in her ears. Then, trembling, she turned the page, desperate for blankness, for silence. But even there, words had already formed, waiting for her. Shall I tell you how it ends? Her breath hitched, and she slammed the diary shut so hard it echoed through the room. Claire didn't sleep much that night. Every time she shut her eyes, she saw the words glowing in the dark, shall I tell you how it ends? Her room, once her sanctuary, now felt invaded. The diary sat locked inside her desk drawer again, but its presence seeped through the wood, heavy and watchful, like it was waiting. She thought about throwing it away, but the memory of that thrift store owner's warning stopped her, don't bring it back to me if you regret it. The way she had said it felt less like advice and more like inevitability. The next morning, Claire dragged herself to class. Her mind was foggy, her stomach uneasy. She kept expecting something terrible to happen, but the day passed with only minor embarrassments. She forgot her homework, stumbled over her words when called on, spilled a little water on her notes. Harmless things, ordinary mistakes. She almost convinced herself that maybe the diary's power was limited, that it had just been lucky guesses before. But when she came home that evening and pulled the drawer open, she found the diary lying there exactly where she had left it, except now it wasn't closed. The clasp hung loose, the cover slightly open, as though something inside had been breathing. Her throat tightened. She didn't remember leaving it like that. With shaky fingers, she pushed it open. Her previous entries stared back at her, but across the next page, new words had appeared without her hand. You tried not to believe. But you will. Write a question. Any question. Test me again. Claire felt her pulse quicken. The temptation was unbearable. She wanted to resist, to shut it again, but her hand moved on its own. She wrote, "What will happen to my roommate, Jenny?" The response came slowly, almost teasing, each letter crawling across the page like a spider's legs. "Tonight, she will cut her hand in the kitchen. The blood won't stop at first. You'll hear her scream." Claire's breath caught in her throat. She shut the diary and shoved it into the drawer, muttering, "It's not real, it's not real, it's not real." She sat on her bed, hugging her knees, waiting for silence to prove her right. An hour later, she heard it. The sharp crash of glass shattering in the kitchen. Then Jenny's scream, high, panicked, cut off by sobs. Claire bolted to the doorway. Jenny was leaning over the sink, clutching her hand, blood dripping between her fingers and splattering against the porcelain. A broken glass lay in shards on the counter. "Oh my God, what happened?" Claire gasped, rushing forward. Jenny winced. "I just dropped it." "Stupid. It sliced me." She held up her hand, blood streaking down her wrist. "It won't stop, God, it won't stop." Claire grabbed a towel and pressed it against the wound, her hands trembling. Jenny hissed at the pressure, but slowly, after what felt like forever, the bleeding slowed. Claire couldn't breathe. Her mind was screaming with the memory of the diary's words. "You'll hear her scream." She had heard it. Exactly as it said. That night, after Jenny had gone to bed with her hand bandaged, Claire sat alone at her desk, staring at the diary. Fear curdled in her stomach, but curiosity dragged her forward again. She had to know. She had to understand. Her pen hovered over the page. Finally, she wrote. "Why are you telling me these things?" The answer came instantly, like the diary had been waiting eagerly. "Because you asked. Because you bought me. Because you are mine now." Claire's hand trembled. "Yours?" She whispered aloud, though she didn't dare write it. The diary's next line appeared before she could even think of a question. "You want to know more? I can tell you things no one else knows. The things hidden. The things coming. The things you can't stop." Her stomach twisted, but her mind screamed with terrible hunger. If it knew the future, if it knew secrets, maybe she could use it. She thought of her classes, her constant worry about failing exams, the gnawing uncertainty about her future. She could ask about opportunities, about safety, about choices. Maybe it wasn't a curse. Maybe it was a gift. Slowly, against every flicker of fear inside her, she wrote. "Tell me something about tomorrow. Something small. Something harmless." The response bled across the page. "Tomorrow, your professor will drop his pen during lecture. He'll look at you when he bends to pick it up. He'll smile, though you'll wish he didn't." Claire blinked at the words. Harmless. Pointless. But the specificity chilled her. The next day, she went to class, her stomach knotted. She sat stiff in her seat, waiting, watching her professor. For the first half hour, nothing happened. Then, as he gestured toward the board, the pen slipped from his hand, clattering to the floor. He bent down to retrieve it. And when he straightened, his eyes landed directly on Claire. He smiled faintly, polite, meaningless, but it sent a shiver through her, not because of him, but because the diary had been right. Again. Claire left class in a daze, her hands cold despite the warmth of the day. That night, she sat at her desk again, the diary before her. The air in her apartment felt heavy, as though the pages themselves were pulling oxygen from the room. She opened it, staring at the scrawled lines, her heart pounding with both dread and need. Her pen pressed against the page. This time, she didn't ask about class, or her roommate, or something trivial. This time, the question trembled from the deepest part of her fear. "How do I die?" The response came more slowly than ever before, each word scraping across the page like a blade. Blood. Glass. Alone. Not long from now. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She dropped the pen, the words burning in her mind. Blood. Glass. Alone. She thought of Jenny's accident in the kitchen. The shards. The blood. The scream. And for the first time, she realized, maybe the diary wasn't just showing the future. Maybe it was shaping it. Claire didn't touch the diary for 2 days. She shoved it to the very back of her desk drawer, slammed it shut, and stacked textbooks on top as if their weight could smother the thing into silence. Every time she passed the desk, though, she felt its pull. The memory of those words gnawed at her, blood. glass. Alone. They hung over her like a curse she couldn't scrub away. She tried to tell herself it was just coincidence, that her mind was filling in connections where none existed. But deep down, she knew better. That journal wasn't just predicting. It was steering her life. On the second night, Claire woke up in a cold sweat. She swore she heard faint scratching from inside the drawer, a whisper of pen nib on paper. She sat upright, heart hammering, straining to listen. Silence. The apartment was still, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound. She nearly convinced herself it was a dream, until, the next morning, she opened the drawer to grab a notebook and found the diary lying on top of her things, open to a fresh page. Her skin prickled. She hadn't left it there. Across the paper, in curling ink, it read, "You can ignore me. But I won't ignore you." Claire snapped it shut, her stomach twisting. She wanted to scream, to throw it out the window, to burn it. But the part that terrified her most wasn't the thought of losing it, it was the thought of what might happen if she tried. What if the diary didn't want to be destroyed? What if it punished her for attempting it? That evening, Jenny invited her to a movie night with friends, but Claire made excuses. She sat alone in her dimly lit room, the diary still shut but practically vibrating in her drawer, like a caged animal pacing. She kept glancing at it, fighting the itch in her fingers. She told herself she wouldn't open it. She couldn't. But eventually, she did. Her hands shook as she flipped it open. "Fine," she whispered. "Fine. You want me to ask? Then tell me, why me?" Her pen scratched furiously across the paper. "Why did I find you? Why did you choose me?" The answer unfurled slowly, the letters sharp and deliberate, as though savoring each word. "Because you wanted to be chosen. Because you ask questions. Because you will write until the end." Claire felt a rush of heat crawl up her neck. Until the end. The words felt like shackles clamping around her wrists. She dropped the pen and slammed the book shut, forcing herself to breathe. She could hear her own pulse in her ears, heavy and fast. But the more she tried not to think about it, the more she did. Her eyes kept drifting to the drawer, to the memory of that chilling phrase. She couldn't shake the thought that the diary was right, she did want answers. She had always been the curious one, the one who stayed up late chasing rabbit holes, who scribbled questions in the margins of her notebooks just to see if she could find the answers later. And now she had something impossible, that promised to answer everything. Even if those answers destroyed her. The next day, she carried the diary with her in her backpack. She told herself it was safer that way, that she could keep an eye on it instead of leaving it at home. But deep down, she knew the truth, she couldn't stand being apart from it. She spent her classes distracted, her gaze flicking toward her bag as if the book might crawl out on its own. At lunch, sitting alone in the corner of the cafeteria, she finally pulled it out. The black leather looked darker under the fluorescent lights, its surface absorbing them like a void. She opened it, heart pounding, and scribbled. "If I stop writing in you, what happens?" The words appeared slowly, but with an unmistakable finality. "You don't stop. Not until you're finished." Her hands went clammy. She forced herself to write again. "Finished with what?" "Your story." Claire snapped the book shut so hard the sound made a few students glance her way. She stuffed it back into her bag, her heart thundering. She couldn't breathe. Her story. The diary wasn't just predicting things at random. It was mapping her life. It was pushing her toward an ending she hadn't agreed to. That night, she sat at her desk with the lights off, staring at the dark outline of the drawer. Her apartment was silent, but in her mind, she could hear the scratching of invisible words across paper, waiting for her to read them. She thought of Jenny asleep in the next room, unaware of the nightmare Claire was dragging into their apartment. She thought of how close Jenny had come with that broken glass. And then she thought of her own fate: blood, glass, alone. It was all connected. The diary wasn't just telling her future, it was circling her death like a vulture. And though her entire body shook with fear, Claire knew the truth: she was going to open it again. She couldn't stop herself. The following morning, Claire awoke with her face pressed to the desk. She hadn't remembered falling asleep there, yet her cheek was stuck to the wood, her pen still gripped loosely in her fingers. The diary lay open before her, its pages sprawled like a body on a dissecting table. A fresh line of words glistened in the faint morning light, ink so dark it looked almost wet. "You can't run from me. You can only write." Her stomach dropped as she scanned the page. She hadn't written those words. They were too neat, too deliberate, perfectly curling letters that didn't match her handwriting. She shoved the diary shut, her breath ragged, and staggered toward the bathroom. She splashed water on her face, gripping the sink so hard her knuckles turned white. In the mirror, she saw herself, eyes bloodshot, hair tangled, face pale, but she also saw something else. A faint reflection of the diary sitting on her desk, as though the mirror wanted her to look at it, to acknowledge it. The thought made bile rise in her throat. She decided, right then, that she had to resist. She couldn't keep letting this thing control her. She wasn't going to write in it again. No matter how much it called to her. That day, she stuffed the diary into a shoebox, taped it shut, and shoved it onto the highest shelf of her closet. She tried to drown it under blankets, under junk she hadn't touched in years. She wanted to bury it so deep it couldn't claw its way back. For a few hours, it worked. She cleaned her apartment, made herself tea, even answered texts from Jenny. She felt almost normal. But by nightfall, the atmosphere had shifted. The air seemed thicker, heavy with something unspoken. Shadows in the corners of the room looked darker, stretched further than they should have. Claire curled up in bed, clutching her blanket, determined to sleep without it. That was when the scratching began. It was faint at first, like the sound of a pencil dragged lightly across paper, but it grew louder, more insistent. The noise came from the closet. Claire froze, every muscle in her body locking tight. She tried to convince herself it was the building settling, or a rat scurrying in the walls, but deep down she knew. The scratching was coming from inside the box. Her breathing quickened. She pressed her pillow over her head, but the sound bled through, relentless, steady. Scratch. 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 As if someone, or something, was writing line after line, filling pages she hadn't yet dared to read. At some point, exhaustion dragged her into uneasy sleep. And when she woke, the shoebox was on the floor in the middle of her room. The tape had been peeled away, the diary lying open on top like a body crawling free from its grave. Her hands trembled as she approached it. The pages were filled, every inch covered in ink. Not her handwriting. The words repeated over and over in looping letters, filling the paper until the letters blurred into one another. "You will write. You will write. You will write." Claire dropped the book and stumbled back, her chest heaving. She couldn't breathe. She wanted to scream, but her voice stuck in her throat. She looked toward her phone, thinking maybe she could call Jenny, or anyone, but when she reached for it, she froze. On her phone's lock screen, where her wallpaper had always been a photo of her and Jenny at the lake last summer, there was now something else, an image of the diary. Its black cover. Its spine. Sitting on her desk. She dropped the phone as if it had burned her. Her apartment suddenly felt suffocating, as though the walls were closing in. She had thought she could resist. She had thought she could bury the book. But it had punished her, made its presence undeniable. She understood now, ignoring it wasn't an option. The diary would not tolerate silence. Her hands shook as she picked it up, the leather warm against her palms as though it had a pulse. She flipped to a blank page. Her throat was dry, but her pen moved anyway, almost without her permission. "What do you want from me?" she wrote, the letters jagged, desperate. The response came instantly, filling the page in a single sweep of ink. "I want your ending." Claire dropped the pen, her pulse racing so fast she felt faint. Her ending. Her story. The diary wasn't just predicting her future, it was dragging her toward it. But a darker realization crept into her mind as she stared at those words. If the diary wanted her story, what would happen if she stopped writing hers and started writing someone else's? Could she divert its hunger onto another life? Could she cheat it? The thought was poisonous, shameful, but it rooted itself deep inside her brain. And that night, with trembling hands, Claire began to write not about herself, but about Jenny. Claire sat at her desk for what felt like hours, staring at the diary's expectant blank page. The pen in her hand was heavy, almost magnetic, tugging downward as though the book itself was pulling her wrist toward it. She didn't want to do it. Every instinct in her screamed that what she was about to attempt was cruel, selfish, unforgivable. But another voice, quieter, more desperate, whispered that it was survival. If the diary wanted stories, maybe it didn't have to be hers. Maybe it didn't matter whose ending it devoured, as long as the ink flowed and the predictions were written. Her mind, unbidden, filled with Jenny's smiling face. Jenny, the only person who had consistently checked in on her since the weirdness began. Jenny, who had begged her to come over after seeing the bruises on her wrist. Jenny, who had once said, half-jokingly, that she wished her life were more exciting. Claire's stomach turned at the thought, but her hand moved anyway. She began to write about Jenny, small details at first, harmless ones. Jenny is at her apartment tonight, eating popcorn and watching reruns of that crime show she loves. She texts me a stupid meme before bed. When she set down the pen, she expected the diary to respond in its cryptic, mocking tone. But the page stayed still. Silent. Blank of new words. Relief washed over her for a fleeting moment. Maybe it wouldn't work. Maybe it only wanted her. But the next morning, when she checked her phone, a text from Jenny awaited her. "You're gonna laugh, but last night I literally did exactly what you always tease me about. Popcorn, dumb crime show, and yeah, I sent you that meme before I passed out. Psychic much?" Claire nearly dropped her phone. The diary hadn't replied, but it didn't need to. Jenny's real life had bent itself to the words Claire had written. Her heart pounded with a sick mixture of horror and possibility. She could control it. She could shape it. That evening, she tested again. She wrote something small but undeniable. "Tomorrow, Jenny will trip on the curb outside her building and scrape her knee." The next afternoon, her phone buzzed. Jenny had sent a photo of her bandaged knee, followed by a laughing message. "Can you believe this? Totally ate it on the sidewalk. I swear the city's out to get me. You still psychic?" Claire's stomach clenched. She wasn't psychic. She was the author now. The diary was her weapon, and Jenny was its ink. For 2 days, Claire indulged in the illusion of power. She wrote tiny, harmless things. Jenny finding a $10 bill in her jacket pocket, Jenny running into her crush at the coffee shop, Jenny accidentally burning her popcorn in the microwave. Each time, reality bent to the words. And each time, Claire convinced herself she wasn't hurting anyone. She was just buying time. Feeding the diary scraps so it wouldn't consume her. But late on the third night, when she closed the diary after writing another silly line, she noticed something chilling. She had written, "Jenny will sleep peacefully tonight." Yet beneath her handwriting, in ink darker and thicker than hers, another line had appeared. Not for long. Her chest tightened. She flipped the page. Another line had been written, sprawling across the blank paper in sharp, cruel letters. "She is not yours to give." Claire slammed the diary shut, panic clawing through her ribs. The room felt smaller, the air dense and suffocating. She glanced toward the corner of her room and nearly screamed. For a split second, she thought she saw a figure there, a shadow crouched low, watching her. But when she blinked, it was gone. The message, though, had been clear. The diary hadn't been fooled. It had allowed her little games for a while, maybe amused at her attempts to outwit it. But Jenny was not hers to sacrifice. The book wanted Claire. It always had. That night, she dreamed, or thought she dreamed, of Jenny. She saw her friend sitting on the couch, laughing at the crime show, eating popcorn. But then the screen flickered, the lights dimmed, and Jenny turned her head slowly toward Claire, her smile gone, her eyes hollow. Her mouth opened, but instead of Jenny's voice, the diary's words poured out. You cannot trade your ending for hers. You cannot choose another story. Write, Claire. Write only yours. Claire woke with a strangled gasp, sweat clinging to her skin. She turned on every light in her apartment, but the shadows still pressed close. The diary lay open on her desk, though she swore she'd shut it the night before. A single line had been written across the fresh page, large enough to cover it corner to corner. If you try again, she will suffer for your disobedience. Her hands shook as she slammed it shut. This was no longer about choice. The diary was tightening its grip, pulling her closer with every word, every page. It had let her believe she had control for a moment, but now the leash was yanked tight. And in her heart, Claire knew something devastating. The book didn't just want her story to end. It wanted her to write the ending herself. For 3 days, Claire avoided the diary as much as she could, but avoidance was no longer silence, it was defiance, and the diary didn't tolerate defiance. Every time she entered her apartment, she felt it before she saw it, a tugging in the air, like a magnet drawing her deeper into its pull. She would find it lying open on her desk even when she remembered locking it in a drawer. Its pages fluttered as if caught in an invisible breeze, but the air in her apartment was still, suffocating. On the 4th morning, the tapping began. Not scratching this time, but a rhythmic tap-tap-tap, like the impatient drumming of fingernails on wood. The sound came from the desk, from the diary. Claire forced herself closer, her breath shallow, every step an act of defiance and surrender all at once. The book's cover was closed, but the tapping was coming from inside. She reached out and, against every instinct, flipped it open. Her heart nearly stopped. The pages were filling themselves. Ink poured across the paper in sharp, deliberate strokes, words etching themselves faster than she could follow. She leaned in, trying to make sense of them. It wasn't a prediction. It wasn't her handwriting. It wasn't even a direct message. It was her day, written as she lived it. Each line described her movements in real time. Claire is standing at her desk. She is opening the diary. She is reading these words now. Her throat tightened. She tore her eyes away, looking around the room in frantic denial. But when she looked back, new lines had already appeared, the ink still wet and glistening. She is doubting her sanity. She is wondering if she can destroy me. She is wrong. Claire staggered back, bile rising in her throat. She grabbed the book and hurled it across the room, her breath ragged, her body shaking. It landed with a dull thud, pages splayed, and then, it began flipping on its own. Page after page turned rapidly, faster and faster, until the sound was like wings beating against the walls. The air in her apartment seemed to pulse with every flip. And then it stopped. The book lay open on a fresh page. Slowly, as if savoring the act, words appeared. You can't escape what's already written. Claire pressed her hands to her temples, fighting tears. Why me? She whispered, her voice hoarse, cracking. Why me? The pen rolled across the desk, stopping neatly against the open diary. More words appeared, looping and cruel. Because you asked. You opened me. You wanted to know. Her mind flashed back to that first night, when she had written something so innocent. Today was boring. I wish something exciting would happen tomorrow. She had asked for this. She had invited it. The diary hadn't chosen her at random. It had been waiting, patient, for someone willing to write. She grabbed the book in a fit of rage, storming to the kitchen. Her hands fumbled for a lighter, a box of matches, anything that could burn it. She struck a match, flames leaping to life, and held it over the page. For a fleeting moment, she felt control return. This could end. She could end it. The flame touched the paper, and died. Not smothered, not burned out, but extinguished as though the page had swallowed it whole. The diary remained unmarked, pristine, almost smug. Before she could react, words surged across the paper in massive, jagged strokes. You cannot erase what has already begun. Claire's knees buckled. She collapsed onto the floor, the book sprawled open before her like an altar, the words glaring at her in the dim light of her kitchen. She wanted to scream, to claw at her skin, to run, but she knew now there was nowhere to go. When night fell, the dreams returned. This time, they weren't just nightmares. They were familiar. She dreamed of the thrift store, the old woman's eyes flashing with something like pity. She dreamed of faceless figures, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all sitting in a circle, each clutching their own diary, each writing feverishly. She dreamed of their eyes turning toward her, hollow, empty, mouths opening in unison to chant, "Write. Write. Write." She woke drenched in sweat, the sound of scratching filling the room. Her gaze snapped to the diary, open on her desk once again. But this time, the handwriting was not describing her, it was racing ahead of her, predicting what she hadn't yet done. Claire will sit up in bed. Claire will look at me. Claire will walk toward me, even though she doesn't want to. Claire will pick up the pen. Her breath came in ragged sobs. She whispered, "No. No, I won't." But her body betrayed her. She slid off the bed, her bare feet moving across the cold floor. Step by step, she followed the words exactly as they were written. She fought it, dug her nails into her skin, bit her lip until it bled, but the invisible thread pulled tighter. The pen was warm in her hand before she even realized she'd picked it up. Her wrist trembled, hovering over the page. New words appeared beneath the ones already written. She will write her ending soon. But not tonight. Not yet. Claire's hand began to move, the pen dragging across the page. Her own handwriting scrawled words she hadn't thought, hadn't chosen. "I am losing myself." Tears spilled down her cheeks as her body betrayed her again, writing faster, filling line after line. She tried to stop, but her hand kept moving, scratching until her wrist ached. When at last it slowed, the page was filled with her handwriting, every line identical. "I belong to the diary." Claire dropped the pen, sobbing into her palms. The book lay silent, satisfied, for now. But she knew what was coming. Each day, it tightened its grip. Each night, it wrote faster, further ahead. The book wasn't just predicting her anymore. It was puppeteering her, pulling her closer to a moment she couldn't stop. Her ending was already written. And soon, she would have to read it. For the next 2 days, Claire lived in a haze, as though she were drifting through a dream too vivid to wake from. The diary never left her sight. Even when she shoved it under her bed or locked it in the closet, she would turn around and find it again on her desk, open, waiting. Every time she tried to ignore it, her body began to ache as if weighted down by invisible chains, until the pressure forced her to give in. It had become a parasite and she the unwilling host. The most terrifying part wasn't just the control, it was the teasing. The diary had stopped merely documenting her day or pushing her towards small acts of submission. Now it had begun to feed her glimpses of her own ending. Snippets of sentences that appeared like flashes of lightning in the dark, never enough to form the whole picture but always enough to freeze her blood. Claire's last words will be a whisper. The floor will be wet when she falls. Her hands will tremble as she turns the key. She will not be alone. Each fragment cut her deeper than the last. She tried to piece them together, tried to guess what the diary meant, but the order was never clear. The hints came scattered, taunting, refusing to give her the one thing she wanted most, the certainty of how much time she had left. On the third night, Claire sat hunched over the book, her face pale in the glow of the single lamp that lit her apartment. The pages in front of her were filled with these fragments, sprawling across the paper in different sizes, some words bold and massive, others so faint they were nearly invisible. The randomness made her sick. It was as though the diary was mocking her attempts to predict it, laughing at her desperation. Finally, with trembling fingers, she wrote, "Tell me everything. Tell me my ending, now." The ink bled through the page as the response appeared, jagged and cruel. "You will know when you write it." Her stomach churned. She snapped the book shut, pushing it away as if its cover were made of fire. Her whole body trembled. The thought settled into her chest like lead. Her death wasn't something she could merely read. It was something she would author with her own hand. She thought of Jenny. She wanted to call her, to hear a familiar voice cut through the suffocating silence of her apartment. But the memory of the warning, "If you try again, she will suffer," kept her phone out of reach. She couldn't drag her friend into this any further. She was already balancing on the edge of something catastrophic, and Jenny's involvement would only tip the scale. That night, she dreamed again. She was standing in her apartment, but the walls were made of paper, lined pages stretching infinitely upward, covered in handwriting. Her handwriting. Every inch scrawled with her life, her thoughts, her fears. As she turned in circles, the words began to shift, the lines bending and rewriting themselves. She saw her childhood entries, pages from journals she had long since lost. She saw grocery lists, to-do notes, even scraps of poetry she had written in the margins of textbooks. And then she saw entries she had never written, ones that described moments in her future she hadn't yet lived. She reached out to touch one and watched the ink smear beneath her fingers. The words bled into one another until they formed a single chilling line that repeated across every page. "It ends when you look behind you." She woke with a scream lodged in her throat, sweat slicking her skin, her sheets tangled around her legs like restraints. The diary sat on her chest, heavy as stone. Its pages fluttered open, revealing a new line that hadn't been there before. "It is closer than you think." Claire shoved it away, heart hammering. She couldn't keep waiting for it to close in. If the book wanted her ending, she had to find a way to fight back. But how do you fight something that already knows your every move? Her eyes drifted to the thrift shop. Maybe the old woman had known more than she let on. Maybe she hadn't just been reluctant to sell the diary, maybe she had been trying to warn Claire, to pass off a curse she could no longer bear. The thought ignited something in Claire. She pulled on her jacket, shoved the diary into her bag, and fled the apartment. The night air was cold, the streets mostly empty, but even as she hurried through the darkness she felt the weight of eyes on her. Every time she passed a shadowed alley, every time she caught her reflection in a darkened window, she expected to see someone, or something, following. When she reached the thrift store, its front windows were dark, the sign flipped to closed. Her stomach sank, but desperation shoved her forward. She hammered on the door until her knuckles ached, her voice breaking as she shouted for someone to answer. At last, a light flickered on inside. The old woman appeared, moving slowly, her expression etched with dread when she saw Claire clutching the diary to her chest. She opened the door only a crack, her voice low and urgent. "You shouldn't have come back." Claire's words tumbled out, frantic. "You knew, didn't you? You knew what this was. Why did you sell it to me? What is it doing to me?" The woman's eyes darted to the diary, her lips tightening. Because once it chooses you, it doesn't matter where it goes. It would have found its way to you anyway. Claire felt the floor tilt beneath her. What do you mean chooses me? The woman leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. It doesn't write for just anyone. It waits for someone who wants answers badly enough. Someone who's curious enough to open the first page. You asked, didn't you? You wanted to know something. Claire's blood ran cold. I wrote that I wanted something exciting to happen. The woman closed her eyes, shaking her head. And now it will never stop. Claire's throat tightened. There has to be a way to stop it. Please, there has to be something. The woman looked at her with a sorrow so deep it made Claire's stomach lurch. There's only one way I've ever heard of. But it isn't freedom. It's replacement. Claire's voice broke. Replacement? The woman's gaze bore into hers. You have to give it another author. Claire's hands trembled against the diary. Replacement. The word slithered through her thoughts like a serpent. She knew instantly what it meant, and she knew who it would cost. Claire stumbled backward from the thrift shop's doorway as if the old woman's words had struck her across the face. Replacement. The syllables rang in her ears, echoing like a curse she couldn't shut out. Her stomach twisted, bile rising in her throat. She pressed her back to the cold brick wall outside the shop, clutching the diary so tightly her nails dug crescents into the worn leather cover. Inside, the old woman lingered behind the glass, her eyes haunted, lips pressed into a grim line. She hadn't slammed the door in anger, she had closed it in resignation. A look of someone who knew exactly what Claire was about to go through and who also knew that she couldn't interfere. Claire staggered down the empty street, her legs moving without direction. The city seemed unusually silent, the kind of silence that swallowed sound rather than carried it. Every streetlight flickered as she passed beneath, the pools of light looking less like safety and more like traps. And always, the weight of the diary in her arms seemed heavier, as if it were burrowing deeper into her chest, rooting itself into her heartbeat. Her mind spun in circles. Replacement. The word had burrowed under her skin like a splinter. It meant survival. It meant the book could be passed on, its curse deflected. But the unspoken meaning was what made her sick. She would have to choose someone else. Someone innocent. Someone who had no idea what was about to happen. That night, back in her apartment, she sat on the floor with the diary before her. She hadn't even opened it, but she could feel it vibrating with hunger, as if it could sense the new seed of possibility planted in her mind. The old woman hadn't given her details, hadn't explained how to do it, but Claire didn't need the explanation. Deep in her bones, she already knew the diary would guide her if she gave it the chance. She fought it. She told herself she wouldn't give in. She couldn't condemn someone else to what she was living through. Every time she thought of Jenny, her best friend's laughing face rose before her eyes, bright and warm, so alive. The thought of Jenny hunched over these cursed pages, veins filled with dread, made Claire's stomach seize. No, she couldn't. Not to Jenny, not to anyone. But the whispers began that night. Not with words, not at first. She would close her eyes and hear faint scratching, like pen nib against paper. When she snapped her eyes open, the diary would be lying there, closed, yet her ears still rang with the sound. By dawn, the whispers had become sentences crawling through her skull. You don't have to die. You only need to choose. They would do the same to you. She pressed her palms to her ears, sobbing into the dark, rocking back and forth as though she could drown out the voice. But it was inside her now, slithering through her veins with every beat of her pulse. Over the next 2 days, the diary grew more aggressive. She didn't need to write in it anymore, it wrote to her. When she left her bedroom for even a moment, she would return to find it open on her desk, lines freshly inked across the pages. Sometimes it addressed her directly, taunting her. You are wasting time. Your ending is already closer. Do you want Jenny to read the obituary instead of the diary? Other times, it listed names. At first, strangers, faces she didn't recognize, but when she Googled them, her chest collapsed. Every one of them was local. Every one of them was alive. Every one of them could be chosen. She stopped searching after the fourth name, her hands shaking too violently to type. And then, one night, the book betrayed her. She came home late, her nerves shredded from hours of pacing the streets, hoping fresh air might numb the ache in her mind. But when she stepped into her apartment, her stomach plummeted. The diary sat open on her kitchen table, though she hadn't left it there. Worse, in thick, bold letters sprawled across the page was Jenny's full name. Claire's knees buckled, her throat clamping shut. She lunged for the book, slamming it closed so hard the sound echoed through her apartment. "No," she whispered, shaking her head violently. "No, not her. Not Jenny." But the message had already seeped into her. The diary wasn't just waiting for her to pick, it was pointing, nudging, pushing her closer to the edge. Jenny was the one person Claire couldn't bear to lose, the one person she trusted with every part of her heart. And the diary knew it. It knew exactly how to sharpen its claws. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat by her window, staring out at the shadowy streets below, the diary heavy in her lap. Her mind flickered between two horrors, letting the diary consume her life, strip her away until she was nothing but another entry in its pages, or handing it to Jenny and living with the blood of betrayal on her hands. Every scenario ended with loss. Every path ended in guilt. Around 3 a.m., she opened the diary with trembling fingers, desperate for something, anything, that wasn't a demand. But as the pages fluttered open, she froze. The diary had filled itself while she wasn't looking. Entire passages sprawled across both pages, written in a feverish, frantic hand. And the words, oh God, the words, were hers. They were written in her handwriting. Page after page of her own voice, her own thoughts, laid out in black ink. Regrets she had never spoken aloud, memories she had buried so deep they barely surfaced in dreams, words she had written in past diaries and long since forgotten. It had stolen her voice, replicated it, weaponized it against her. The final line, at the very bottom of the page, made her blood run cold. "If you don't choose, I already have." She snapped the diary shut with a strangled cry. Her vision blurred with tears, her chest heaving. It had her cornered. It was no longer asking. It was threatening. Jenny's life, her very existence, hung in the balance. And for the first time, Claire wasn't sure she had the strength to resist. Claire barely remembered falling asleep. Her body had given out sometime after dawn, collapsed across the floor with the diary clutched to her chest like a stone anchor dragging her into the depths. When she woke, the sun had set again, casting her apartment into a twilight gloom. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. The diary was gone. Her heart seized, her lungs compressing until every breath rasped like glass in her throat. She tore through her apartment in a frenzy, flipping cushions, throwing open drawers, ripping through closets. Nothing. It was as though the book had never existed. Except Claire knew it had. Her trembling hands still bore the indents from clutching its leather cover. Then her phone buzzed. The sound nearly shattered her. She fumbled it from the counter, expecting, praying, it would be Jenny checking in. But the message wasn't from Jenny. It wasn't from anyone she knew. It was from a number she didn't recognize. Just a single text. "You don't need to look for it. She has it now." Claire's skin iced over. Her thumb shook as she typed back, "Who?" No reply came. She called the number, but it was disconnected. Her phone slipped from her grip, clattering to the floor. A scream tore through her, raw and silent, caught between her ribs and her throat. "Jenny." The name roared in her mind until nothing else existed. The diary had warned her, if you don't choose, I already have. And it had chosen. Her body moved before her mind could catch up, grabbing her keys, her coat, rushing down the stairwell and out into the night. She had to get to Jenny. She had to stop this. She had to fix it before it was too late. The drive across town blurred past in a tunnel of headlights and tears. Every red light felt like a noose, every second wasted a blade slicing closer to Jenny's neck. She muttered prayers she hadn't said since childhood, promising anything, everything, her life, her soul, her sanity, if only Jenny could be safe. When she reached Jenny's apartment complex, she nearly forgot to park, stumbling from the car with the engine still running. The building loomed before her, windows glowing faintly like eyes watching her arrival. She sprinted up the stairwell, her palms slick, her chest caving with every breath. Jenny opened the door almost immediately when Claire knocked, smiling. "Claire? What's going on? You look, oh my God, are you okay?" Jenny reached for her, concern painting her face. She was real. She was here. Relief nearly crushed Claire. For a moment, she wanted to collapse into her friend's arms and sob until dawn. But then she saw it. Lying open on Jenny's coffee table. The diary. Claire froze in the doorway. Her pulse thundered in her ears, drowning Jenny's words. The diary's pages fluttered gently though there was no breeze, as though it were breathing. Its ink shimmered wetly in the lamplight, sentences still scrawling themselves across the paper. Jenny noticed her gaze and frowned. "Oh, that? I was going to ask you about it. I found it outside my door this morning. Was it yours? It's strange. I swear it was already writing in it when I looked. Kind of creepy, honestly. But it knew my name, Claire. It wrote my name." Claire's knees buckled. She clutched the doorframe, bile burning her throat. Jenny took a step closer, worry etching her face. "Claire, what is this? Why are you shaking?" Claire's lips parted, words clawing to escape, but no sound came. She couldn't tell her. She couldn't hand her this terror. But she couldn't leave her to it either. Jenny bent down, picking up the diary, and Claire lurched forward in panic. "Don't touch it," she shrieked, the sound ragged, inhuman. Jenny dropped it instantly, staring at Claire with wide, bewildered eyes. "What the hell, Claire? What's going on?" But the diary had already shifted the air. The room thickened, the shadows in the corners lengthening unnaturally. The lamplight dimmed, pulsing as if suffocating. Words scrawled furiously across the pages now, lines forming so quickly the paper seemed to burn beneath the ink. Claire forced herself forward, dropping to her knees in front of the book. Her hands hovered inches above it, shaking violently. The words came into focus. "Choose. Or I will finish it." Tears streamed down Claire's face. She turned to Jenny, her best friend, her anchor, her light. Jenny looked back at her, fear and confusion warring in her eyes. "Claire," she whispered. "You're scaring me." And in that moment, Claire knew. The diary had never wanted just her. It wanted despair. It wanted betrayal. It wanted to sever love itself, because love was the one thing strong enough to resist it. And it had maneuvered her into this exact position, where she would either sacrifice her own life, or damn the person she loved most. Her hand dropped onto the diary. "I'm sorry," Claire whispered, not sure who she was speaking to, Jenny, herself, or the unseen hunger that bound them. Her fingers curled around the pen lying beside the book. The diary opened to a blank page. Her reflection stared back at her from the glossy ink, but it wasn't just her face. Behind her image stood a figure cloaked in darkness, faceless, patient, waiting. Its hand rested on her shoulder, possessive and inevitable. Claire closed her eyes. Then she wrote. The words came easily, almost too easily, pouring from her hand as though she had rehearsed them in some forgotten nightmare. My ending belongs to me. No one else. Not Jenny. Not anyone. Only me. The diary trembled under her palm, resisting, its pages rattling like wings caught in a storm. Ink bled upward, fighting her script, trying to claw the words away. But Claire pressed harder, carving each letter with ferocity, her tears smearing the lines until they looked like wounds torn open across the page. And then, silence. The diary stilled. The air loosened, the shadows retreating. For the first time in weeks, Claire felt the crushing pressure lift from her chest. The book lay quiet, lifeless, its ink dull and motionless. She slumped forward, breath ragged, vision blurring. Jenny caught her, pulling her into her arms, her voice breaking. "Claire! Oh God, Claire, stay with me!" But Claire knew she wouldn't. She felt it, the pull deep inside, threads unraveling from her soul, her body hollowing as though the words she'd written were reaching inward, erasing her from the inside out. Her final breath left her lips in a whisper, soft against Jenny's ear. "Don't, ever, write in it." Her body went limp. Jenny sobbed, clutching her, shaking her, refusing to let go. The diary lay closed on the floor, its cover unmarked, its secrets buried once more. And then, quietly, so quietly Jenny almost missed it. The cover twitched. A single line appeared across the first page in ink so dark it seemed carved from night itself. The diary that wrote back. Followed by 2 new words, still wet, still waiting. Property of Jenny.